Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer.
Welcome to the first of two talks on the concepts and principles that govern warfighting, commonly known as strategy and tactics. The line between the two has always been somewhat nebulous, with operational tactics lying in a sort of middle ground. Moreover, it's a distinction that really didn't exist when the art of war was compiled. So rather than wasting time pondering irresolvables, we'll look at the governing ideas and principles first, then the measures employed to realize them on the battlefield, and simply deem the former something akin to strategy and the latter tactics. As already discussed, Sunzi regarded warfare as the greatest affair because the state's survival and extinction depended upon successfully undertaking it. Warfare has to be rationally approached, based upon assessing the enemy and yourself, and requires being thoroughly familiar with the terrain while striving to emerge victorious without actually fighting. Although unstated, diplomacy and subversion are expected to play a significant role, just as they were in his era. Even though states should be ruthless in their practice of efficient warfare, the art of war's orientation is reactive in nature. The text envisions a need to actively defend a state, but never advocates undertaking aggressive measures to annex others or annihilate enemies the way Qin, which eventually conquered the realm, would in succeeding centuries. While defeat is the primary fear in warfare, the high cost in men and materials can lethally debilitate a state. This increases the incentive to achieve victory without any clash of forces, even if it only results in unmolested survival. However, aggressors sometimes insist on invading, and conflict proves unavoidable. Then the army has to fight aggressively, but only when the conditions for victory can be created. Otherwise, measures have to be implemented to frustrate the enemy, and a defensive posture adopted until that moment arrives. Now, Sunzi boasted, quote, "If I do not want to engage in combat, even though I merely draw a line on the ground and defend it, they will not be able to engage me in battle because we thwart their movements." He also said, "Those who excel at defense bury themselves away below the lowest depths of earth." Now, by doing so, the ancients who excelled in warfare first made themselves unconquerable in order to await the moment when the enemy could be conquered. As summarized in the chapter Military Disposition, quote, "One who excels at warfare first establishes himself in a position where he cannot be defeated, while not losing any opportunity to defeat the enemy. For this reason, the victorious army first realizes the conditions for victory, and then seeks to engage in battle. The vanquished army fights first, and then seeks victory." Many factors might prevent victory and keep the commander from being able to shift to the offensive. Sunzi says, "Being unconquerable lies with yourself, being conquerable with the enemy. Those who excel at warfare are able to make themselves unconquerable, but cannot necessarily cause the enemy to be conquerable. Therefore, it's said a strategy for conquering the enemy can be known, but not yet possible to implement." However, when victory can be foreseen, the focus falls upon manipulating the enemy in order to frustrate, enervate, and depress their forces, thereby creating the tactical imbalance of power that will provide an opportunity for an easy victory. Maximum power should then be applied at the critical moment. Sunzi says, "The victorious army is like a ton compared with an ounce, while a defeated army is like an ounce weighed against a ton. The combat of the victorious is like the sudden release of a pent-up torrent down 1,000-fathom gorge." Now, Chuan, the technical imbalance of power, which we previously discussed, is inherently temporal and localized in nature. So overall, the enemy might be stronger, their state larger, and they may have far greater resources, none of which augur well. But prior to the modern era, battles occurred in relatively confined areas. Thus Sunzi said, "The army doesn't esteem the number of troops being more numerous because it only means you cannot aggressively advance. It's sufficient to muster your own strength, analyze the enemy, and take them. Only someone who lacks strategic planning and slights the enemy will inevitably be captured by others." This is done by exploiting the unorthodox, as we also discussed earlier, and the strategic configuration of power. Sunzi says, after estimating the advantages in accord with what you have heard, put your plans into effect with strategic power, supplemented by employing field tactics that respond to external factors. So, in case people forget, Sunzi reiterates, strategic power is controlling the tactical imbalance in accord with the gains to be realized. Now, assuming the necessary circumstances can be realized, Sunzi felt 4 force ratios allow aggressive action, but anything else requires evasive measures. He says, if your strength is 10 times theirs, surround them. If 5, attack them. If double, divide your forces. If you are equal in strength to the enemy, you can engage him. In fewer, you can circumvent him. If outmatched, you can avoid him. And he observes that a small force that acts inflexibly will become the captives of a large enemy, and reminds commanders that one who knows when he can fight and when he cannot fight will be victorious. Now, in addition to deceptive measures, the primary way the enemy can be manipulated is luring them with the prospect of profit and deterring them with the specter of harm. Sunzi says, in order to cause the enemy to come of their own volition, extend some apparent profit. In order to prevent the enemy from coming forth, show them the harm. As already seen, Sunzi stressed the importance of compelling others rather than being controlled by them. Adopting the strategic defensive by choice is, in fact, one way to control others, even though it seems passive and appears to have been imposed. However, a more active way is seizing critical objectives. Sunzi says, if I were to ask, if the enemy is numerous, disciplined, and about to advance, how should we respond to them? I would say, first seize something that they love, for then they will listen to you. This works equally well when trying to pry an enemy force out of a well-ensconced position. Sunzi says, if I want to engage in combat, even though the enemy has high ramparts and deep moats, he cannot avoid doing battle because I attack objectives he must rescue. Since all movement is inherently destabilizing, it's essential to avoid being tricked, lured, or compelled yourself into heedlessly rushing forth. Sunzi therefore says, if the entire army contends for advantage, you won't arrive in time. But if you reduce the army size, your baggage and heavy equipment will suffer losses. And he predicted the probable effects. If you abandon your army and race forward day and night without encamping, covering 2 days' normal distance at a time, marching forward 100 li to contend for gain, the 3 armies' generals will be captured. The strong will be the first to arrive, while the exhausted will follow. With such tactics, only 1 in 10 will reach the battle site. If you contend for gain 50 li away, it will cause the general of the upper army to stumble. By following such tactics, half the men will reach the objective. And if you contend for gain at 30 li, which is about 10 miles, then 2/3 of the army will reach the objective. At the same time, the art of war emphasizes the importance of quickly concluding any conflict. Sunzi says, when employing the army in battle, a victory that is long in coming will blunt their weapons and dampen their ardor. If you attack cities, their strength will be exhausted. If you expose the army to a prolonged campaign, the state's resources will be inadequate. When their weapons have grown dull and their spirits are depressed, when our strength has been expended and resources consumed, the feudal lords will take advantage of our exhaustion to arise. Even though you have wise generals, they won't be able to achieve a good result. An obvious conclusion then follows. Sunzi says, thus, in military campaigns, I have heard of awkward speed, but never seen any skill in lengthy campaigns. No country has ever profited from protracted warfare. Thus, the army values being victorious. It doesn't value prolonged warfare. Victory can be conceived in terms of achieving certain overarching results. Sunzi says, when the army of a hegemon or true king attacks a great state, their masses are unable to assemble. When it applies its awesomeness to the enemy, their alliances cannot be sustained. For this reason, it doesn't contend with any alliance under heaven or nurture the authority of anyone else under heaven. Victory isn't brought about simply by killing the enemy, but by causing chaos and disorganization with a properly structured attack.
In antiquity, those who were thought to excel at employing the army were able to keep the enemy's forward and rear forces from connecting, the many and few from relying on each other, the noble and lowly from coming to each other's rescue, the upper and lower ranks from trusting each other, and the troops to be separated, unable to reassemble, or when assembled, not be well ordered.
However, it should be recalled that
the highest realization of warfare is attacking the enemy's plans. Next is attacking their alliances. Next, attacking their army. And the lowest, attacking their fortified cities. One who excels at employing the military subjugates other people's armies without engaging in battle, captures other people's fortified cities without attacking them, and destroys other people's states without prolonged fighting.
as always, how to accomplish this is a burning question. For Sunzi, deliberately minimizing the destruction and casualties are the keys. The commander, quote, must fight under heaven with the paramount aim of preservation. Thus his weapons will not become dull and the gains can be preserved. It's a realization that gets repeated with statements like, preserving their army is best, destroying their army second best. And in this context, he says, attaining 100 victories in 100 battles is not the pinnacle of excellence. Subjugating the enemy's army without fighting is the true pinnacle of excellence. Victory results when the essential elements in this vision are implemented. However, having created the preconditions for victory, it seems like an ordinary accomplishment, nothing special. Thus Sunzi comments, the victories of those that anciently excelled in warfare were not marked by fame for wisdom or courageous achievement. They conquered those who were easy to conquer. Thus their victories were free from errors. One who is free from errors directs his measures towards certain victory, conquering those who are already defeated. Thank you for watching.